Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women in TTRPG virtual panel hosted by TourGuide Games. We are thrilled to convene this space tonight. We know folks will be logging on and tuning in over the next few minutes, so as we get settled, I want to take this time to introduce myself and who we are as a company. I'm Larry Zoll, CEO and founder of TourGuide Games. TourGuide Games is a concierge gaming platform connecting players of any experience level to professionally led, on-demand, one-shot game sessions where you and your friends can start playing in under 15 minutes. We call our game leaders tour guides, and our goal is to make tabletop role-playing games as easy, fun, and accessible as a night out with your friends, all without leaving your couch. Quite simply, TourGuide Games wants to change the way friends play together. And that's why we're here today. If we want to change the way friends play games together, we have to do our part to change the way games are played. And we thought the best way to do that was to open up space for important conversations and events like these. To talk more about tonight's panel, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, TourGuide Games co-founder and CMO, Keiko Zoll.
Thank you, Larry. I am honored to be moderating a group of amazing women tonight to talk about the importance of women's inclusion and representation in gaming. Our Women in TTRPG event is framed around a few basic assumptions. First, that women are tired of being told what to do and how to do it, and we're tired of carrying the emotional burden of explaining the what and how to others. And so by providing women the space to discuss and ideate about what a fully inclusive TTRPG community and industry looks like when women are authentically included, we can amplify those in our community already working towards this vision. So some quick housekeeping before we get started. We're planning to have a brief 5 to 10 minute Q&A session with questions from the audience following our panel discussion tonight. So if you would like to ask a question of our panelists, please enter it in the chat here on Twitch, on the Twitch stream, and make sure you start your question with #question. We're going to be curating these questions throughout the event, and that helps pull it out for our moderator to take a look at. So be sure to also let us know if your question is for all of the panelists, for a single panelist. Just let us know. And again, start that with #question. So if that sounds good to everybody, let's go ahead and get right to it. It is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome and introduce our panelists for tonight's discussion. Please join me in welcoming Satine Phoenix, Renee Rhodes, and Leah Liebseller. Satine Phoenix is an artist, author, entertainer, and storyteller. As the owner and founder of Gilding Light, Satine leads a production company focused on content that encourages people from all ages and walks of life around the globe to come together and create epic collaborative stories. A former community manager of Dungeons & Dragons, Satine is a dungeon master of Sirens of the Realms and host of Dungeon Master's Guide and GM Tips Season 2. She is also the co-author and creator of the New Praetorians graphic novel series and the nonfiction book, The Action Heroine's Journey. Satine is also the founder of CelebrityCharity20.com, an annual charity event where celebrities raise money by live streaming tabletop role-playing games. We're also joined by Renee Rhodes, a freelance writer, community manager, and podcast producer. Renee fell into the TTRPG community when she began a family-friendly D&D podcast with her close friends called Fate and the Fable Maidens. Before long, Renee was streaming, traveling to conventions, and working on tabletop products. While she remains a social media and community manager by day, Renee spends her nights honing her bardic skills through writing, podcasting, and streaming. Look for her 2 new podcast projects releasing this year, Stone Soup for the Adventuring Soul and Where the World Sea Ends. And finally, Leah Liebseller is a gamer, designer, and anthropologist, and all-around self-described awkward turtle. She's been playing TTRPGs for 15 years, GMing for 12, and designing for 3. An avid reader and watcher of most things nerd or geek, from Studio Ghibli to astrology, Leah is currently focused on finishing her PhD work in the anthropology department at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where she studies gaming communities in the pandemic. Leah runs What's Your Origin Story, a project aiming to create an oral history database focused on player origins. She's an editor for The Geek Anthropologist and co-owner of the newly minted KL3 Studios, focused on game design and community action. And most recently, Leah has joined us here at TourGuide Games as one of our first tour guides. So thank you and welcome, everyone. So without further ado, let's dive right into tonight's big conversation. So I know each of you come from very different, very impressive backgrounds with a variety of experiences, but I'd love to go even further back than what I just shared in each of your bios, like all the way back, right? So I'd love to hear what are some of the earliest formative messages that each of you received about women as gamers, about women's roles in gamings. What are some of the things that you were each, first told or what you first heard? Whoever wants to jump in, feel free to go for it.
Well,
Go for it.
I was a part of drama club when I first started playing D&D in 1988. And then in high school in the mid 90s, I saw my friends playing and I said, I love this game. I've been playing it by myself for a long time. I'm playing with you. They said, okay. So I actually never had a negative experience because I'm very aggressive and like when I want to do something, I really want to do it. So, and even through college, everyone in San Francisco was very open and welcoming. And it wasn't until I say 2010 that I started even hearing about this whole thing about women having, there was a negativity about women playing. I'm very lucky. So my first experiences were so good and so welcoming. And also I do come from a very diverse community in Sacramento and San Francisco. And so maybe it relates to that where we were just nerds and as a collective, we got bullied. But within our collective, we were having a great time.
Right. Awesome.
I have seen recently that my high school has a tabletop role-playing club, which is amazing to me because they didn't when I was there. I'm so excited to see that more and more in high schools that I have friends who are teachers at, and some of them are even like the sponsors for those clubs at their school, which is so amazing. And so many people that I went to school with who now play TTRPGs on streams and digitally. I didn't know they were nerds. And for me, I knew I was a nerd. I just thought I wasn't that kind of nerd. I was wrong. I was so wrong. And I think that what it took for me, because I did hear a lot of that messaging, and it wasn't even direct, it was just what I had absorbed sponge-like from around me, that yes, women are expected to not play tabletop role-playing games. And yes, it's so wild. And I don't know why I even remotely let my mentality conform to that, but I just always felt like it wasn't for me. When I first started playing, I realized how wrong I was because I am a writer. I am a theater nerd. I love storytelling. I'm so passionate about that. And I love people. So collaborative storytelling just naturally fit with all of my other loves. It just took me a while to branch out from what expectations had been kind of enforced around me.
Interesting. Leia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm more in line with Satine. So gaming in general, I didn't really know anything about until late teens, and TTRPGs were mostly like my first foray into gaming in general because my parents were kind of anti-game. My mom, had heard that they're gonna, it's all shooting and violence and too much TV time wasn't good, and so we had pretty limited screen time anyway, and things like that. So I didn't engage with the community at all until I was asked to join a TTRPG game when I was 16 or 17, and was in a very welcoming space to all identities. And then in undergrad, I found out that running TTRPGs and being a DM was like the way to get friends. Because I didn't know how to make friends after high school. I was like, how do? And so I just started going to like the gaming clubs and started saying, hey, I'm gonna DM, and then that was it. So I've I've been in multiple all lady games. I've been in mostly spaces that are very gender inclusive, very LGBTQ and color inclusive, like POC inclusive. And so it was like only after I had been in the community for a while and started going to more public facing things that I found out, oh, hey, trolls exist here. Oh no. And so that's been that's how I got in.
Interesting. That's very interesting how it was, you kind of came into the experience. It was very open, it was very inclusive, but kind of as you got broader into the wider sphere, the wider industry, for lack of a better term, it's like all of a sudden is when you start to see maybe
Right.
there's some not great messaging that's happening out
Sure.
there. Satine, I would love to hear from you as a leading voice for women in this industry, particularly, and really kind of piggybacking right off of what Leia just shared, like what have you observed around inclusion and representation for women in gaming? Like if you had to give your 2-minute state of women in, TTRPG address right now, like what would it be? Or, what's the report card game or the report card grade, excuse me, that you would give on how it's going right now?
Honestly, right now, I think a lot of us in the live streaming, podcasting, even the web series, our web series is like 2008. For the past 12, 13 years, enough women have been vocal about it that there are so many more women gaming right now that it's just amazing. We have, I think the numbers are closer to 50-50, but leaning towards more women playing. And funny enough, I think my age bracket. So versus before when women never gamed, it's more like women just didn't talk about it all the time. We just did the thing because we have hobbies. So what we're finding out now, and what I really enjoy is, like I'm coming out with my first book on Kickstarter very soon, like in a couple weeks. And hopefully, and then Islands of Sina Una came out. That was the creator is a woman. And there are other things that are more female led. And I'm hoping that by doing these things and by having been a live streamer, a podcaster, or in academics, people get to see us do these things and say, I want to do these things too, and I can because they did. So right. I'm hoping that it's like this beautiful like cascade of people believing in themselves and putting themselves up front. And that's really what it is. It's about awareness and all of these new ways of absorbing what women are doing. Twitch, TikTok, you're just seeing more people come out. And so for all of you women out there, just do the thing and be very vocal about it.
Yeah. It's, I think something that I've just witnessed just in general across all forms of media, particularly within, I want to say like the last, 5 years or so, is this idea that representation matters. And when you see somebody who looks like you, who sounds like you, in the media that you consume, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I can do that too. That's suddenly attainable for me in a way that may not have been, had you not seen that person up there.
I didn't have anyone like that. I'm half Filipino and I'm very alternative and bisexual. Like I'm all those other things, I'm like in my own little box.
Yep.
I never had a role model to look up to in that regard. I mean, I had Julie Strain on the heavy metal things, who's got like mage armor and bikini chainmail, which I'm totally into, by the way. I mean, thank you, mage armor. But that was it. That was my role model back then. I'm hoping that by putting myself out there, other people can see that and relate and be like, oh, it's not just these people or these people, it's all of them. Like Sirens of the Realms, it's women of all preferences and backgrounds. And even like we have somebody that works for the government on our show, and she's also a belly dancer. And we've got the whole variety, and not even just like, this is what I do. These people are like larger than life. And it's been really great going to the cons. I think we were kind of talking about cons earlier before we started, and seeing people kind of come out of their even normal everyday shell when they're playing these games. I can go on about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think is so appealing about TTRPG as just kind of a genre and experience, right? Is, you know, there's the representation of like who physically shows up and appears, you know, on your screen or around your table, right? But there's also then that the limits are your imagination in terms of what you can be once you're in that experience. So I definitely can you know, appreciate the multiple layers of representation that happen within this particular gaming space. So as we built out this event, I actually asked each panelist to help kind of shape this conversation. And Renee, you offered a very intriguing tidbit that I have to ask you about, and I have nothing more other than game store bathrooms. Please tell me more.
Game store bathrooms, am
there?
I right? It's so when I started gaming, I was surprised. I did not expect to fall in love with this art, this hobby. And so it took me a while to adjust. One of the first things that I did was walk into a local game store and buy some dice. I got my own set, and I got a set for a friend whose birthday was coming up. And I decided that I would give gaming another shot. I'd kind of been turned away by a bad experience a few years prior, where I didn't realize what I needed. I'm neurodivergent and chronically ill, and sitting at a gaming table for 6 hours without knowing like that's what I was doing or knowing what like the expectations were of the game was very stressful for me. So I walked away from TTRPGs and was like, oh, well, I was right. They weren't for me. So then a few years later, I came back because a friend wanted to role play for their birthday. So I walked in, I grabbed some dice, and I did find us a game to connect with at our local game store. And over time, I started getting more and more connected there. I would game there pretty regularly, but I would say that the other GMs in the group that I had were all men. Most of the players that I had were men. We started to branch out a little bit. We got to the point where in a reasonably small West Texas town, we'd get about 50 to 60 players every week, which was amazing. But the game store still felt very masculine. And the way you could most tell that was in the bathrooms where the seat was up most times.
I live in a house with two boys, so yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And then I traveled to Austin, Texas, where my family is, and was like, well, now that I'm like in this hobby, I'll check out some of the local game stores here. And I went in to the bathrooms to find products for those who menstruate. And I was shocked. I was literally, it was like the most eye-opening thing. Like, oh my goodness, they have considered AFAB people in this, like in these bathrooms. And it was eye-opening for me because I realized that not every place was like that one game store. And like, to be fair, it wasn't entirely on the store themselves. Like, in part, it was just the gamers who went in, used the bathrooms, and leave the seat up. But I thought it was like a really small kind of telling thing that made women feel more included and thought of in the space. And that's what I wanted. I did okay, but I think that I am someone who also doesn't really take no for an answer. As far as like someone telling me a place is not for me. When I started playing, I was with another femme person, and we kind of made a space for ourselves in that community. She was one of the other players on the podcast Fate and the Fable Maidens, which was an all-women group. We only started because we were 4 friends who wanted to play together. We figured if we were going to be playing long distance anyway, might as well record it. And if we're going to record it, we may as well make it good enough to release, you know? So as I went on and found more and more things like that, including non-labeled bathrooms as far as like gender specification at conventions, I started to feel more and more like this space can be and is open to everyone. It's just that we're still combating some of those initial stereotypes that were created and represented in media and then perpetuated by gatekeepers and others. So, and people like myself who just didn't realize that I could branch out, was not ready to branch out and be so open-minded. So that's something that it's a small thing, but you can notice when game stores and conventions and communities make spaces for everyone and cater, thinking of what their needs are, considerate of the people who will be there, and are open to all of them.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Now I have so much more context to what you had to offer that was just game store bathrooms.
I mean, I thought it would be a fun little...
It's like, I'll bring it up. I'll see where it goes. Whatever. I so appreciate that. And it's really interesting too, like, you know, the whole premise of, you know, TTRPG around collaborative storytelling is, you know, is this sense and this act of creation. And that sometimes, you know, look, if we're not going to be represented, then like, fuck it, we're going to create the spaces for ourselves. Yes, I guess we're swearing in this. Just
good to know, because I do family friendly content, and so sometimes I try to like overcompensate, and I'm like, phooey.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I guess we're I guess, I don't know, TVM now. So Leia, I would like to talk to you about, you know, as part of how we shaped this conversation, you mentioned how that women have always been here, right? We've always been here in this space. And even as, you know, Renee just mentioned, right? Like if we're not going to be here, we're going to create these spaces for ourselves. And then it really comes down to, we've been here, but people just haven't known it. Personally, I feel like that's, you know, just very on brand for women's work in general, right? We're here, we're doing it. No one knows. I would love to hear more about your thoughts about visibility in general, and kind of what that means for women in gaming, and for you also.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the things that that the three people on this panel have in common is we just kind of like will make space for ourselves, which not everyone can do, right? Not everyone has that ability, and so it's in us making space that other people are given space, and I think that's super important to kind of echo what has been said so far. But you know, for a long time, role playing in general, at least over the last century, has been a very at home kind of thing for a lot of people. It's in the domestic space. It's at the dining room table, and so we don't always see all the people who play. One of the things that I have found in doing research in this community is that almost every gamer I meet, no matter how old they are, because I've done interviews everywhere from people who are like, you know, 80 to people, you know, who are 18. And almost every single one of them has a story of the women that they played with, particularly the older generation, the women that they played with, the LGBTQ community people that they played with. You know, they have BIPOC friends who have this group that no one knows about, but does exist on the side over here. And so people are here, and we're just not seeing them. Because, you know, sometimes when we get seen, it's not super fun. So we just stay in our domestic space. And that domestic space is ours to create and facilitate and curate, which is, I think, why it's so important, particularly for TTRPGs, where we give so much of ourself. And it can be an extremely intimate experience with the people that you're in that room with, because you're experiencing parts of yourselves as you play. But now, now we're seeing way more women just here and out and doing podcasts like Fate and Fable Maidens, and being a part of GaryCon, and being a part of the spaces that are seen. on Twitch and on YouTube and on all the other places. And I think it's important for those of us who can to just like bulldoze room.
I love that.
Um,
I'll do
because
it.
it's right. I mean, yeah, like let's do it. Let's bulldoze room so that people understand that like that women, I think women over 30 make up the largest portion of gamers now. Like I think that's the newest uh statistic that I've heard, which is crazy. It just goes to show that like when we were doing statistics in the 80s, how many women were buying games for themselves and being counted as bought game for son.
Mm,
Like, right? Like,
yeah.
how many were assumed to not have been buying games? And how it has representation and visibility and doing panels like this, how is that going to change how the next generation sees themselves and sees this experience? So I hope that answers the question. I'm not really
Yeah,
sure if it did,
no,
but
absolutely. No, there's so much to unpack with, I mean, everything relative to the topic for tonight. But I think I think it was really, I really appreciate how you can acknowledge that one, like, yes, we need to bulldoze rooms, right? And make these spaces, like here's honorary hard hats for everybody, right? But also recognizing that not everybody also has the privilege or the ability to make those spaces.
Sure.
So I think it's really important. I appreciate that, being named. I think something else it's really kind of important and also I think fair to acknowledge that tonight we are a panel of mostly white cisgendered women here convened around this virtual table. And that's not necessarily as representative as it could be of the community, and that's fine. So I'd love to be able to just kind of open up, kind of round robin style, whoever wants to chime in here, to talks about the importance and relevance of intersectionality and where this plays out for women, for queer players, for non-binary folks, and kind of where intersectionality really fits into this conversation within gaming. And whoever wants to take the mic and jump in, feel free.
Yeah, I think if we're making room at this table, we can't just pull out one chair, right? Like we're putting a lot of chairs around a table so that we all have spaces. For me personally, gaming ended up being kind of life-saving for me from a neurodivergent and chronically ill perspective. It gave me something that I could do when I was in a lot of pain. I could still call in to virtual games, or I could just go sit at a table with friends. I also definitely discovered some of my sexuality through gaming. I am a bisexual woman. Tomorrow is the asexual, like International Asexual Day or something I saw on Twitter, and I'm also asexual and aromantic. So like there's a lot of joy in recognizing that there are chairs for everyone and making sure to consider that, because not every space is inclusive. I mean, even in the queer community, being bisexual and asexual, both of those are sometimes treated as not actually a part of things. And that's not right. That's not true. But we see it in a variety of communities. So it's not just tabletop that we are working and striving for recognition of what our spaces need to include to be considerate of everyone and make sure that anyone can sit in the chairs that we have pulled out, and be give recognition to what in ourselves might be inherent biases. And for me, I recognize that as someone who believed gaming was just for sweaty men in a basement at their parents' house or something. Like that's a harmful stereotype, but I did subscribe to it for a long time. And so now looking back and recognizing what my biases were and where I got them, I can conform moving forward to a much broader horizon and a much more welcoming, more considerate mentality.
Oh, that's fascinating that like through this, it's like you confront your own biases. That's fascinating. That's awesome.
I like to piggyback on that. So like make a space that's welcoming for everyone, and then the space that you are making, make it safe. So making it a place that people can be themselves, and you can hold you just hold the moment so that everyone can express themselves very purely and honestly and consensually by
Yes.
building into your table and into your session 0. And then even further, what I like to do is build in all the diversity into my games. So my games aren't a bunch of dudes fighting a thing or women fighting a thing. It's everyone fighting a thing. And so and sometimes I'll surprise players by having, there's the quest giver is a man looking for their partner who is they and, born male, but maybe transgendered. So it's like, I try to put that in without it being like, look at this thing that I'm doing. Aren't I awesome? No, it's just this like natural, normal thing. I'm from San Francisco. Nothing is weird. Everything is normal, you know? So by making it normal and making it a part of my stories, I'm showing other people how normal it is. And so suddenly I run virtual games multiple times a month for my Patreon. People all over the world. And I've been watching over the last 2 years that I've been doing this, the acceptance, and then people coming to me privately going, so the next character I want to make, and I just found out I'm bisexual, like I would like to explore that in this game. And I'm like, of course. And so I kind of take that. It maybe shocks some of the players at first, but because I'm so calm about it, they're all of a sudden welcoming and calm. And now 2 years later, it's not even a thing because
Right.
these people have just been in that world. And these are people who are not from big cities like I am. They're from, like, I right now live in Colorado. It's a very white place. But by being able to have access to diversity and seeing it happen in real time and the reactions and acceptance in real time, it's just so much easier for people to start to be okay with everything.
That's amazing.
I'd like to just give a shout out to this panel because we have 3 bisexual lady panelists on this panel altogether, which I think might have been an axe of 4. Yes. I just want to call like it feels so
I'm not
good.
like usually out. I just kind of like assume people know that about me, but like if my parents are watching, surprise.
Yeah,
But
but
just because we're bisexual doesn't mean, like, I'm monogamous. I'm married to a man.
Right.
I'm
No, sure.
bisexual, but
Right.
Yeah.
I've just been finding myself in more and more of these spaces. Some of the people I play with are in the chat right now and can attest to accidental bi spaces, just like people coming together. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to take the time to create the spaces to be like, particularly as the DM or as anyone at the table, to be the person that shows everyone else that it's cool to just be cool. It doesn't need to be like weird or new or like something that you have to like say, oh, look how amazing I am because I included this alternate thing in my space. And that's one of the DMs. So for my dissertation, I started my research in January 2020. I was going to go to game shops and I was going to be there and just experience the world of what it means to play publicly because it wasn't really something that I had done much of. I've been mostly a pretty domestic space player with my friends in curated spots. And so I wanted to understand, like, what is this community outside? What does it mean? How does the imagined world shift when you are at a table with a whole bunch of other people around you doing other things? And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and I found myself in a whole bunch of alt spaces that I don't think I would have been in, and gaming with alternative folks who take the time. Like one of the DMs, who's, I'm not going to call her out, by name, but she's in chat. She is the best at session zeros and at creating spaces that are really, really inclusive. They just are like, not we are now marking this space as inclusive, like like on purpose. I don't really know how to say that. Just the space is inclusive by nature. And I think that like, for me, what I want to see is not spaces that are marked inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
but that are just inclusive. Some of like so my master's was on live action role play. So I went to some conventions and things for that. And one of the rules that I learned there that I had not seen before was always leave a chair open. And that was just what you did. Like, in most of those spaces, it wasn't even like stated out loud. There was just always an extra chair at the table. And if someone sat down, then you pulled another chair to the table. And that's the kind of inclusivity that I want, an unmarked inclusivity. Everyone is just there because they can be. Like,
Yeah.
that is the future that I want to work for.
Oh, I love that. I just got like chills, a little verklempt, not gonna lie. I do. I love that imagery of just always having an extra seat open at the table, especially also coming off of Passover. Kind of reminds me of Elijah, but but no, that's just that's really wonderful. Awesome. Thank you everybody for sharing that and for really just like going at this, like, you know, bulldozing our room into talking about intersectionality. Leah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about some of your anthropology work and maybe perhaps around the What's Your Origin Story project. Because I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of TTRPG and other forms of this interactive, collaborative storytelling and just the human tradition of oral history and the roles that women have historically played in oral history traditions. I just love to get some of your thoughts and takes on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, when I read that question in the list of questions, I was like, oh, that's a really big question. Now I don't know how I'm gonna answer this. I mean, the answer is that human beings of all kinds have always and forever will be engaged in oral traditions, and it is those oral traditions that help us create the world that we live in. It's a part of what creates our norms. It's a part of how we understand our history and our ancestors and what has come before and what will come after. Oral traditions are some of the most important traditions that we can have, and they are also some of the most ephemeral. Because they are, as soon as they are written down, they become concrete and they change differently. So if you have a story that gets passed down from generation to generation, it changes. How people tell it changes. And when it's written down, and then the next person writes it down, and the next person writes it down, it still changes. It just changes very differently than when it's an oral tradition. Um, and I mean, I am 100% a proponent of stating that TTRPG communities are very steeped in oral tradition. One of the things that we do over and over and over again is, like, when someone new comes in, we start telling stories that are iconic to this group. How do I identify this group? Oh, it's by telling the story to you. Or when we're in a long form campaign or in the same group for a long time, we do this thing where we take these stories and we tell them over and over and over again. Oh, like, yeah, that's just like that one time that X thing happened. Or, oh yeah, that's a really that really creates this arc for this character because remember when.
Right.
Or, at the beginning or end of a game, you hang out and you talk about last game, you talk about the game that just happened, and in doing that we process what occurred, and then we mythologize it in many ways to then help create the space. Like, those are the stories that we tell are the things that we remember and are the things that we um are the things that we use to mark what we are.
Yeah.
And how are women involved in that? I mean, they just are. Anytime we do any oral tradition work, women are going to be there. And one of the spaces that stories get told over and over and over again is going to be in the kitchen, like, right? Like, is going to be in the Doubt Mystic space, is going to be around the dinner table, and is facilitated often by the person who takes care of the hearth.
Mm.
in different cultures that has been any number of genders, depending on what culture you're in and what time period you're in. And a lot of times it's also the women. So really anytime you have like who takes care of the fire is going to be kind of the principal person that dictates what's going on there, which is one of the reasons why the DM is very important in a game, because they are the person that often centers the game.
Yeah.
So that is what I can say in a very short time about oral traditions.
No, I think what's so fascinating is that, you know, especially when you talked about, let's like, you know, how we kind of mark these moments and these experiences of the human experience, right? I think also to our point before, I think both Satine and Renee had also mentioned around, you know, when you start being like authentically inclusive, and now you get into this oral history tradition, you start to set normalizing reference points where it's not like, look at this cool woke thing that I'm doing, right? Like, it's like, no, this is just how it is, right? And it starts to normalize that in each telling and each iteration of those stories.
Intersectionality becomes pervasive.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
And that's the reason that we have to be really careful about the stories that we're retelling. Like if you're going to be introspective and want to create better spaces, more inclusivity, unmarked inclusivity, pay attention to what stories are you telling. Are you always telling stories about white men? Are you always telling stories about I mean, just throwing this out there, always about like going into a space and taking it over and colonizing or changing, or like what stories are we telling in our TTRPGs? What systems are not telling those stories? And when we tell new people, like when we introduce someone to TTRPGs, what stories are we telling and what does that say? And if we want to make, like for me, one of the ways that I like to do that is being just very careful about the stories I choose to retell.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so, I think it's so on point too. And I think, you know, you had mentioned like once you transmit from oral tradition to a written tradition, everything changes, right? And you can see those points and layers of like ownership and privilege once it becomes written word. And so then, you know, who owns that written word, who's telling that story? I think that's huge. That's a phenomenal point to bring up. Thank you for raising that. You know, I think we've talked a lot about, you know, the sheer act of creation that is the TTRPG experience. And for me, this is me speaking very personally, that I've always viewed the act of creation as something very deeply feminine and feminist, and a lot of times out of necessity, I feel like. So Renee, I'd be interested in your perspective as a podcaster, a game author, somebody who is a content creator. How does, I know you mentioned that you are asexual, but how does your identity or how you choose to identify as a woman or not show up in that creative process? And I'd love to, you know, just kind of hear more about that. Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty pervasive. Every part of my identity has influenced my work in one way or another. And because in nature, tabletop role playing is collaborative storytelling, the personalities and identities that players have brought to the table have also influenced their storytelling and the story as a whole. For me, I started tabletop gaming and podcasting content creation with Fate and the Fable Maidens, which was an all-women podcast. And as time went on, I realized that there was like interest in that, which was just surprising to me. It was family friendly, which there was also a lot of interest in. People who felt more comfortable when there wasn't, you know, language or sexual content in a game. And as someone who is asexual, I had to learn how to engage in romance and and sexuality in gaming in general, just because role playing, that was not something that was very comfortable for me starting out, and I've learned how to grow into over time. But a lot of my projects center around ways that I can represent not just me but others. So Fate and the Fable Maidens was something for family friendly, something that we hoped would reach young people. If people could listen in the car with their 3-year-old, maybe that 3-year-old will grow up to roll some dice and enjoy that. For projects now, I start to see, you mentioned the hearth, Laya. It's the project that I'm working on right now that's in production is Stone Soup for the Adventuring Soul. And it's a very diverse group of people who bring what they have to say to the table. One of the players mentioned in auditions, like, hey, I'm disabled, and I think that in general, D&D passes over that. You have magic to heal things. And so you don't really face what it's like to carry those scars with you. And so they formed and built their whole character around that, to share some of their experiences and narrative in a way that might be understandable for people who are listening. On the topic of asexuality specifically, I am running I have this idea that is turning into a podcast later this year because I've gotten creative blessing for it, but I didn't mention it because it isn't like official. It doesn't have like a working title yet or anything, but I will be running a Monster Hearts podcast that is an entirely ace spec cast, so that people can come to the table and represent all brands of asexuality, demisexuality, gray sexuality, as well as their approach to sex. So like if they're asexual but biromantic, they can bring that to the table. If they're sex averse, we can bring that to the table and all work together to approach it in a way that is narratively appropriate for each of us, comfortable and safe. As Satine mentioned earlier, we'll use a lot of safety tools to ensure that that is a possibility. And I love seeing that. I love that tabletop role playing can be that. I want to see more asexual representation in media. I want to see more asexual characters. And that is a way to do it where you will get diverse perspectives, where you will understand there isn't just one type of asexuality that you subscribe to. It's the spectrum. It's round. It's not flat. Especially for me as someone who is asexual and bisexual in a straight passing relationship. So as a woman and as a queer person, as a neurodivergent and chronically ill disabled person, that shows up a lot in what I'm passionate about and how I approach my storytelling. But it has been very very difficult as far as professional settings. In my first job, I worked in social media for about 3 years in a position where I could see my coworker across the way watching The Office on their computer, and they got paid significantly more annually than I did. And I laugh about it now, but it was rough. And I finally got out of that setting because I realized, like, I can't create in a space I can't create and simultaneously work in a space that is not that. And so I did start getting into gaming more, but I regret to say that I've never actually worked in gaming in a gaming job with a team where I was not the only woman.
Yeah.
And that has had repercussions. There was an instance at PAX Unplugged a few years back where the team was all there, but I was assigned to run preview games at a table that was far away from the rest of the booth, which was a very difficult dynamic because I was the sole person responsible for anyone who walked up to that table, and I was very vulnerable to a lot of, as someone who's also experienced like assault at conventions in the past, there was just a very frightening vulnerability to being the only woman and the only person who is sent to that table to run games. I've had to describe to men that I've worked with what it's like to be spoken over, in part because, you know, even as just a volunteer at gaming stores, I would experience a group of all guys as players where I'd have to be like, hey y'all, I'm putting my foot down and raise my voice, which I never do. But like, if I get mad, I do the quiet, like angry face.
Right.
I spoke out because sometimes you have to fight to be heard. And I have often, you know, set that kind of boundary, that expectation with coworkers before, like, hey, I'm used to being talked over by men. So when you surround me with all men, I'm gonna be on edge from the beginning. I'm sorry, but I'm also not sorry because that's what I've been taught. And it's something that I've had to say regularly because it is something that does keep happening. So yeah, in my creative content that I have full control over, I get to show as much of my identity and as much of the identities of other players as I possibly can, whatever anyone can bring to the table. But I have found professionally that I'm still very limited by the perspectives of those that I've worked with. I'm hoping to change that in the future. I've gotten out of a lot of toxic workplaces in the past, and so I have some, you know, very limited patience for that at this point, I think. But I also recognize that I have a tendency to be hopeful and optimistic and walk into situations that have not been the best for me as a queer, neurodivergent, and chronically ill woman. So
that's thank you for sharing all of that. I think, you know, it leads right into this kind of next thing that I really wanted to get out, that ultimately is like why we are gathered here today, is like, if we could all just kind of like take a step back and like, when women are authentically included in all aspects of the TTRPG industry, what could that look like? Like, what would that amazing North Star vision look like? Like, what would that look like for players, for GMs, for authors, publishers, for spectators, right? For people who, like, you know, they've seen Stranger Things and they're like, oh, that looks like a fun game that they're playing around a table that I've never done before. Let me try that, right? Like, what if we were truly collectively, authentically including women in this? Like, what would that look like? Whoever wants to jump in.
Honestly, it would look like the way Netflix is looking right now and movies are looking. You're just going to have a more interesting, wider variety of stories. You know, I dissected the hero's journey into like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got most of these stories that have been written and published throughout the, you know, centuries. They're from men and they have very specific things, or we're going on this quest to go fetch this thing and bring it back home. But what do women want? What is that inherent need to make a woman feel that she's getting what she needs in a story? And so when people start to understand the different needs of different people, and I'm not just talking about men and women, I actually like my book even says, I'm sorry, I have an understanding of what other people need who are, you know, non-binary, even like that's a whole different thing, or asexual, that's even another different thing. So the more people we have that are diverse, creating stories based on what they need, we'll just have more interesting stories to pull from, so that the future generations can even make even more stories and not have to be hindered by these weird stories that we've been telling ourselves about this horrible experience women are having in gaming. I mean, there's a lot of bad things happening. I remember walking into a convention and wanting to turn around and leave because of it was just so not welcoming. But you know, like, we women are here, we're doing the thing. In the future, hopefully it'll just be a norm. And now what we're really debating about are the wild stories that are being told, and like, you know, like, are they going too far in different directions? That's the conversation that I would rather be having, honestly. But I'm very grateful to be having this now and being a part of this movement, which is straight across the board inclusivity.
Yeah. Leah or Renee, any thoughts on like what that vision would be, or like what
Yeah.
even like what are some of like the, I don't know, so like I've never run a game, so like I don't know what's involved in the mechanics of that. Like what, you know, like what would it be to be an inclusive game leader?
Well, you know, to add on to that, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I started in family-friendly content. So while Stone Soup for the Adventuring Soul is not, we're exploring the trauma of adventuring and how that can affect you as you retire and start a tavern together. It's a lot of fun, but it's not built to be family friendly. My next project is Where the World Sea Ends, which is actually casting right now, and it's a Kingdom Hearts inspired game on, and you can find that like on my Twitter. That I'm really excited for because it's going to go back to that like family friendly content, something that is very accessible for younger ears. What I would like to see is high schools with RPG clubs where girls feel like they can go and roll dice, where young women grow up recognizing that this is a space that they are not just allowed in, but welcomed in. I would love to see more diverse teams. I would love to work in a tabletop organization. I love working in tabletop gaming, but I want to do it in a way where I'm not just a token or like an afterthought, but I am a part. And I know I can. I know that the possibility is out there, and I've gotten so much personal control back in some of the podcast production that I've been doing on my own. I have that like ability to control the space that I'm surrounded by, but once the space is fully inclusive, I don't need that. I can be out and open and still feel welcomed and fully a part, which is valuable. It's important. It's great to feel like you can be a part of something.
Can I just share something really quick?
Yeah.
Just because this is like something new for me. So my husband runs Apotheosis Studios. They do gaming books and they make games. And so he's like, we're doing this Bard book. I'm like, awesome. And it's Sirens, which is amazing. I've been working on it for a long time. I've been working on Sirens by myself, really, you know, creating it, writing it, and casting it. Now I'm working with his team, and his team isn't just men and women and that are like, you know, here and just, I don't know what I'm trying to say. The diversity of the people that he's brought on and that we're currently bringing in for this Bard book are from all over the world, and various sexual, you know, identities, and so many different backgrounds. And the thing that I am noticing while we're creating this book, while we're writing the story, it's like 20 adventures. Like, it's insane. I love how, you know, we'll put an idea out, and then this person from this background, from this part of the world, gives this input, and then this person from this part of the world, and I'm like, wow, this little tiny seed that I put in or someone else put in is now flourishing and actually evolving in a way that I never expect. You know, and whereas I kind of know what my friends would say around the game table, you know, especially as a dungeon master, you're kind of built to anticipate a little bit. But with this group of creators, artists, 3D artists, musicians, writers, I'm able to see actively right now what it looks like when you have a diverse group of people that just accept each other, and the only thing they're focused on is the story and creating art. It's mind-blowing. So I guess that idea, that future thing, that future question is actually a thing that is being developed now, and I know I'm not the only person that's experiencing that.
That's amazing. That's incredible to hear.
I see it. I know it's out there. I know it's in the realm of possibility. I just haven't had it yet.
I think I've answered this question a little bit already, but the other thing, like one of the things that I would love to see is just like, oh, my team is accidentally all women. Like, not on purpose, like not, I'm going out of my way, like, you know, I'm hiring a team of people, whatever, for something, for X thing that I am doing in games. And you put it out to, you know, a diverse, broad spectrum of spaces. And like you pick all your top candidates and you accidentally find that they are all women, and you're like, okay, I guess I have to find diversity in a different way. That is what I'm looking for. Because there's so many times where it's just like, oh well, we couldn't find a woman with a PhD in games to be on this panel. We couldn't find enough people, like enough women to fill whatever you're doing, or to be that token on the team or whatever, or we go out of our way to hire a woman. I would love for us to get to a space in which we're like, oh, oops, it's all ladies.
Yeah.
In the same way that we do for more represented populations.
Amazing. I love
Yeah.
that. I do want to be conscious of, this has been such an amazing conversation. I do want to be conscious of our time.
I did just notice that.
I know, I was like, oh my God. So we have gotten some questions in the chat. And I think actually what I want to do is, one of the questions that came up in the chat, I already kind of had like pre-scripted here. So I'm just going to kind of roll this all into one here. I'd like to start with Satine, but also give some, the rest of the folks here on the panel an opportunity to chime in as well. But Poppy Rocking asks, how do you seek out content creators or community spaces outside of the, pretty cis-het white male mainstream? And kind of just to put my own spin on this too is, like, who's doing this, right? Who's out there? You've mentioned each of your own resources, but like, who are the other authors, players, podcasts, whatever, where you're really seeing this really intentional, authentic inclusion and representation? And Satine, I'd love you to lead this off to round us home.
Man, if you just look up, if you're on Twitch or your podcast, just look up different, like if you're looking for other people, just go to the places. If you want to look up podcasts that are all women, go there. If you want to look up all Filipino Twitch streams, you can just go and Google it. Like, seriously, I'm very lucky. People reach out to me in private messages to like look at their Twitch stream. So I get this like beautiful, consistent flow of new streamers just like coming at me, and it's beautiful. I love it. But really, take your head out of the, like, I wonder where they are, and go and look for them. Go and find them. Watch all the new streams. I am so impressed. There were not very many streams, not many podcasts when I first started. Now quarantine this is like the good part, is that people are being so much more active. There's representation. So if you want it, don't wait for it. Go get it. Go look for it.
Oh, I love it.
I have something to add as the resident, like, the social media manager, community manager. Hashtags are there for this. They're organizational tools. You want to find something, there's probably a hashtag for it. Some good ones to check out. I personally, I'm a writer and I do National Novel Writing Month. So like there's an entire hashtag for LGBTQ rhymos. You can just go and find a bunch of people who are writing queer novels. And they're amazing. It's amazing stuff. So one of the ones in the tabletop gaming one particularly, like, you could definitely scroll through the TTRPG hashtag on Twitter and just find some cool people that way. But there's also things like Self-Promo Saturday. And under that hashtag, you can find a lot of people who are promoting their own work. And Follow Friday is another one. While I recommend being careful how you approach it, because actually mass tagging people is not a great approach, but you can definitely find some that are focused on specific projects or creators that have amazing projects you may not have realized. Either their following is small or you're not following that circle, but you can start engaging, and through them, it starts to become a domino effect where the more creators you are aware of and following, the more projects and creations you see just by nature.
I call it the rabbit hole. So I'll be on Twitter and I'm like, oh, who are the artists that are doing really cool stuff in very specific styles? And then I click, and those people follow other people, and it's like, these are people you suggest, and I'll be there for an hour, and it's just this beautiful flood of new content. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. And there are like specific hashtag days where you'll see something going around. So if you keep an eye out for those portfolios for artists, particularly, or something about the tabletop community, if you see something, click the hashtag and start to see who you can find who's doing really cool stuff. That's what hashtags are there for. Little known secret of social media. They're not just random.
Right. Awesome.
Make that make the algorithms work for you, right? Like that is okay, so I'm gonna let you all in a secret that might call me out a little, but that's fine. I get most of my news from Facebook. How do I do that? For the last 4 or 5 years, I have spent my time curating who I'm following and what I share. And what that means is I get a bunch of Indigenous news. I get a bunch of BIPOC news. I get a bunch of news from people that I know is accurate, that I know that I can reshare, and I know who I like, the people who share that I need to check before I share it. And in like that way, I get a whole bunch of local news and I see a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know before. And you can do the same thing, but just for all of the funnest TTRPG stuff and design stuff and artist stuff, which is how I do my Twitter. And I have gotten to know some of the coolest podcasters just by following the lists of podcast fams, which are some of the best. It's actually how I found Fate and Fable Maidens for the first time. That's make that algorithm work for you. If that's what you want on your page, share, and comment on the stuff that is going to get you more of the stuff that you want.
That's
another thing. Let me tell you another thing. Don't just go hunting for people. Be a part of the communities. That's a really big thing, because I love, one of my favorites is the D&D 5e Facebook group. Hey guys, I love it so much. You're great. 160,000 amazing gamers who are just all in. Go to that community, but don't just go and sit and watch or poach. Go and be a part of it. Gilding Light, I love my community. We have an amazing community and they're all creators. And so people are like, hey, what do you do? I'm like, go to our community. You want to be a part of this? Go and talk to the other folks. Because what I see a lot of is I want to be a personality. It's well, what does that even mean? Are you a creator? Do you want to create with people? Here are people who are wanting to create. Be a part of that group and engage with them. Build friendships, because that is what this game, the TTRPGs are about. It's the bonding and going on the adventures. So if you're starting a campaign book, if you're starting a podcast or a Twitch stream, you're going to be with these people for a really long time. Get involved with them and what their lives like. Don't use them. Be a part of who they are.
I love that. I think it's a great way to kind of close this out, is it's about being authentic. You're this collaborative creation, and it's not transactional, right? Just come to it with full open heart. I love that. This has been an incredible conversation. I feel like we could go for another hour. And I thank you to everybody who did submit questions in the chat. I apologize that we can't get to all of them.
Sorry that we talk so much. I know I particularly am a wordy bitch, so.
It's all good. And I'm not apologizing for any of this. We're not.
Oh, thanks.
So that's it for our questions, right? We had several, and we're able to at least call out one. So again, thank you to everybody who did submit them in the chat. Before we call it a night, I want to make sure that the folks that are watching at home know where they can find each of you online. A little moment for you to have a quick shout out on any projects that you've got coming up, or where folks can follow along to get more info. I know each of you has your Twitter handle underneath your profile right now, but I'm just going to kind of go lightning round. Go, Satine, where can folks find you, and what's your next big project that we should all be on the lookout for?
I eat and breathe and create thebardbook.com right now. That's April 22nd. The Kickstarter starts, my very first Kickstarter, and it is amazing. We have a full soundtrack, and it's bards and a new bard class with 10 bard subclasses that are in for introverted bards and extroverted bards. And it's a whole new city. So go to thebardbook.com, sign up, Kickstarter, April 22nd, and it's just going to be really amazing. So you can find me there pretty much.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. Renee, I know you have a Kickstarter also launching soon.
I do.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and kind of any other projects you've going on and where folks can follow along?
Absolutely. So I did just drop in Twitter. So my Twitter is just a little bit off in the overlay, but you can find me at RayDNR on Twitter. And that's where I post a lot of my personal projects. Right now I'm doing a lot of creative podcasts with the blessing of Weave the Tale, which is an entire network of their own. But I can mention two of those particularly. Hashtag Stone Soup Cast. I know I just mentioned hashtags are your friends, so we're using them for my podcast projects. Stone Soup Cast is where you can follow along to find the upcoming Kickstarter. We're just waiting on Kickstarter for the approval of our pre-launch page, so that's coming up soon, and we'll actually go into launch in April as well. I'm super excited for that one. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it is about 6 retired adventurers who are dealing with healing from the trauma of their own adventures and starting a tavern together as their next stage of their journey. I'm very excited about it. I know I've said that so many times, but I just can't express. It's a very good group of people and it's a GM-less game. So I'm actually just acting as director and making sure we meet narrative beats. I'm not GMing or a voice on the podcast at all. Then there's World Cast, hashtag World Cast. That one is casting right now on Twitter. So I have an open casting call up. It is my pinned tweet. And I am very excited for a Kingdom Hearts inspired game that is entirely family friendly. It's going to be a world hopping adventure with the power of heart and fighting the darkness with light. I can't wait. The casting for that ends at the end of April. So I'm casting roles for players as well as NPC voices, which will all be provided as scripted lines after we do the role play so that it's not me voicing every NPC. So those are the two. Kickstarter for Stone Soup Cast, casting for World Cast, and then I mentioned the Ace-Spec Monster Heart show. That one's going to be casting in June, Pride Month, you know, so keep an eye out for that. I think that's about it. Oh, I recently hit 4,000 followers on Twitter, which was super awesome. So we're going to be having a dice giveaway this week as well.
Oh, fun.
I'll probably start that tonight, actually. So anyway, follow along.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Leia, bring us on home. What have you got on the docket when you're not all but dissertation right now?
I mean, that's pretty much my whole life. No, actually, it's not for the next 2 months. I finished research and taking some time off, but that's neither here nor there. You can find me at Play Scholar on pretty much everything. I am most active on Twitter and Facebook, but I think I technically have an Instagram. So you probably find me there too if you wanna see all the things I don't post. In terms of projects, what's your origin story is the one that you can engage with. So that is literally just a collection of oral histories of people who game. So that is, we do interviews and also a journaling activity for COVID. It's basically, it has a bunch of questions. You can go on there and ask, you can answer the questions that just ask you about how you started gaming and the different places that you started gaming, who you started gaming with, things like that. We also do interviews that take about an hour. So if you want to do that, you can. It's all open source and is literally just meant for the community to hear other people's voices about how they started, find connections, and also for academics and scholars as they go about researching gaming communities. So if you want to get involved with that, I'm going to...
Oh, you just muted yourself by accident.
I'm going to drop a link into Twitch. Hopefully it shows up. And
Love
then
it.
all of the people who are in chat right now are going to hate me for just announcing this when it's so many months away still, probably. Me and some of my players, not my players, I'm not the DM in this game, I'm a player. We are starting a podcast called Wait, Where Were We? Where we just focus on all of the bullshit that occurs between actual session stuff. So it's just literally comedy bits and the weird stuff that we talk about, because that just doesn't get enough time. You know, everyone curates for all of the like adventuring, and hearing all of the stuff at the table that isn't the game. It's just so much fun, and we love it. So that's hopefully coming out by the end of summer. So stay tuned. Other than that, that's about it. My dissertation, I think.
Very good. Can you just say out loud where folks can do the origin story project or go to that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's wyostory.wordpress.com. You can also find us on Facebook for more information. So if you just put in what's your origin story on Facebook, it will pop up. I do believe we also have a Twitter, so you can find us there as well. We're on a little bit of a hiatus right now, but we usually post questions every 2 weeks if you want to engage in journaling, and we do interviews whenever you want us to.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you again, ladies. This has been so wonderful. We're so grateful for your time, for your expertise tonight. This has just been awesome. We are going to, if you only caught part of it or are just coming into the end of this, we are going to put this up everywhere on all of our social places. And so, yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for the night. So to learn more about TourGuide Games, to book your own game experience with us, you can head on over to, super simple, TourGuideGames.com. Games are available to play and are booking now. And that's it. That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys.